Okay, so you want to win a world war. Build the tanks, ship them overseas, outproduce the other side, and let the bill sort itself out once it's over. Here's the first number that should stop you. Financing the war from 1941 to 1945 cost the United States $296 billion. That is roughly 8 times the entire federal budget of 1940, every year for 4 years. At the peak, it consumed 40% of everything the country produced. Federal debt passed $258 billion, larger than the whole economy. And America came out of it the richest nation on earth. By the end of this, you'll know how a war that size actually gets paid for, why building more tanks than everybody else was not the thing that decided it, and why the Second World War was settled less on any battlefield than in a tax office. Start with what things cost, because the sticker prices are where the scale becomes real. A Liberty ship, the plain welded cargo hull that carried everything, ran under $2 million. You need thousands of them. Move up a tier. The B-29 Superfortress program cost about $3 billion. That is more than the Manhattan Project, which built the atomic bomb for roughly $2 billion. The aircraft cost more than the weapon it was designed to carry. Now the whole thing. $296 billion between 1941 and 1945. Somewhere between 4 and 5 trillion in today's money, depending on how you measure it. Defense spending was 1.5% of the economy in 1940. By 1945, it was over 37%. But here is the cost nobody puts in a war budget. Every factory you convert stops making the thing it made money on. In February 1942, American plants stopped building passenger cars altogether and did not build another one for civilians until 1945. You are not adding a war economy on top of a normal economy. You are switching the normal one off. So before you build a single tank, you have to solve a completely different problem. Not where to find the steel, where to find the money. There are only 3 ways to pay for a war. You tax it, you borrow it, or you print it. Every country in the conflict used all 3. And the mix each one chose is what decided who was still standing in 1945. Start with tax. The top marginal income tax rate in the United States reached 94%. But the rate is not the interesting part. Who paid is the interesting part. Before the war, income tax was a rich person's problem. Around 7 million Americans filed one. The Revenue Act of 1942 lowered the exemption and immediately found 13 million new taxpayers. By the end of the war, close to 40 million Americans were paying income tax, most of them for the first time in their lives. Then in June 1943, the government solved collection permanently. It started taking the money out of the paycheck before the worker ever saw it. Automatic withholding. A temporary wartime measure, it was never removed. If tax comes out of your salary before it reaches your account, that is a Second World War policy that has outlived every person who voted for it. Taxes covered a little over 40% of the cost. The rest was borrowed, about $211 billion of it. Some came from banks, but the campaign that mattered was the war bond. 85 million Americans, more than half the population, bought over $185 billion of them, usually a few dollars at a time, straight out of the same paycheck the tax had just come out of, which is the part worth sitting with. America did not borrow the money to fight Germany from a foreign bank. It borrowed from Americans. The debtor and the creditor were the same people. Tax what you can. Borrow the rest from your own citizens. Then grow fast enough afterwards that the debt shrinks on its own. Now, production. Because this is where the war was actually decided and the numbers are close to absurd. American factories built more than 300,000 aircraft, more than Britain and the Soviet Union produced combined. In 1944 alone, the United States built more planes than Japan built in the entire war. Tank output went from 331 units in 1940 to 29,497 in 1943. 96,000 bombers. 2.4 million trucks, 6.5 million rifles. The clearest example is the Liberty ship. The industry standard build time was around 230 days. Henry Kaiser's yards got it to 45, then under 3 weeks. As a stunt, one yard assembled the SS Robert E. Peary out of 250,000 parts weighing 14 million pounds in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. That one was propaganda. The underlying point was not. By the autumn of 1943, American yards had replaced every ton of Allied shipping sunk since 1939. German submarines could still sink ships. They could no longer sink them faster than they appeared. And the war did something else at home. Unemployment had hit nearly 25% in 1933 and was still above 17% in 1939. By 1944, it was under 2%. The largest employment program in American history was a weapons order. Here is the reveal, though, and it has nothing to do with effort. Every major combatant was bombing factories. Germany bombed Britain. Britain and America flattened German industry. Japanese cities burned. Nobody bombed Detroit. The United States fought the most expensive war in history with an industrial base that was never attacked once. No general executed that. It is geography, and it was worth more than any strategy anyone came up with. 3 stories, and they are 3 different ways to pay. Meet Henry Kaiser. Before 1940, he had never built a ship. He built roads and dams and was part of the consortium behind the Hoover Dam. When the contracts came, he ignored how shipbuilding was done. Rather than assembling hulls plate by plate on the slipway, he had whole sections prefabricated inland and welded together on arrival, and he hired people who had never seen a shipyard, including tens of thousands of women. His yards produced roughly 1,500 ships. He also built a health plan for his workers that outlived the war, and you know it today as Kaiser Permanente. Now, the other side of the ledger, occupied France. After the armistice in 1940, Germany handed France a bill for its own occupation. 20 million Reichsmarks a day, 400 million francs. The stated purpose was maintaining German troops, and the amount charged was far beyond what those troops actually cost. Between 1940 and 1944, France transferred roughly 479 billion francs to Germany, more than 60% of French pre-war annual output, and one of the largest forced transfers ever recorded. Germany was not paying for its war. It was invoicing the countries it had taken. And then Britain won. Britain also sold off its overseas assets, borrowed heavily under Lend-Lease and then the Anglo-American loan, and spent the next 60 years paying it back. The final installment, $83.3 million, was paid on the 29th of December 2006. Britain finished paying for the Second World War, the year before the first iPhone. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, because 2 of those 3 models were doomed from the day they started. Mistake 1, financing your war with somebody else's economy. That was Germany. Occupation levies, seized assets, forced labor, food taken from occupied populations. It works while the map is growing. The moment the territory starts shrinking, the revenue shrinks with it. A war economy built on extraction cannot retreat. It has to keep conquering in order to keep paying, which means it can never stop, which means it eventually loses. Mistake 2, winning and going bankrupt anyway. That was Britain. It spent its reserves, sold its holdings, and borrowed the difference on terms it did not set. Victory did not cancel the invoice. Victory arrived with 1. There is also a third method nobody prints on a poster: inflation. Print money, let prices rise. Repay tomorrow's lenders in weaker currency. Rationing and price controls existed partly to hold the lid on it. Every combatant did this. None of them advertised it. And the risk nobody expects is the one that outlives the shooting. Emergency financial machinery does not get switched off. Withholding was temporary and is permanent. The income tax that reached 40 million Americans in 1945 never went back to 7 million. The war ended. The apparatus built to pay for it simply carried on. And it is still how a modern state collects money from you. You don't go back to the old system afterwards. There is no afterwards. Now the actual ledger. 2 countries on the winning side, 2 completely different outcomes. The American ledger, spend $296 billion. Finish the war with federal debt above $258 billion, larger than the entire economy, a ratio the United States has not matched since, not in 2008, not in 2020. Now the other column. National output roughly doubled between 1939 and 1945. Unemployment went from a decade-long emergency to effectively nothing. Every factory was intact. And in July 1944, at Bretton Woods, 44 nations agreed to fix their currencies to the dollar and the dollar to gold, which quietly made American money the settlement layer of half the planet. The payback period is the strange part because that debt was never really repaid. It was outgrown. Growth and inflation shrank the ratio across the following 30 years, while the principal stayed enormous. America did not clear the bill. America got large enough that the bill stopped mattering. The British ledger, same war, same winning side, Foreign assets sold, reserves gone, rationing that ran deep into the 1950s. Bread was rationed after the war, not during it. And a repayment schedule that ran until 2006. The difference between those two ledgers is not courage and it is not strategy. Both countries fought the entire war. One borrowed from its own citizens and had an untouched industrial base to grow into. The other borrowed from a foreign government and had been bombed for years. Then America did the thing that looks like generosity and is also the best trade in commercial history. The Marshall Plan sent about $13 billion to rebuild Europe between 1948 and 1952. Rebuilding your customers is not charity. It is demand creation. Step back and the shape of it is simple and it has almost nothing to do with tactics. 3 countries ran 3 financing models. Germany paid with other people's countries, which only works while you are winning. Britain paid with its own future, and the invoice kept arriving for 61 more years. America paid with a promise to its own citizens, backed by factories nobody could reach. Only one of those 3 survives a long war. And the moment this one became a long war, the ending stopped being a military question. 60 million people died settling it. That is the real number, and no ledger contains it. But the machinery that decided who was still standing was financial. The Allies did not outfight the Axis. They outbought them. That is it for today. Subscribe for more.